Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. This is the CBR650R. As always, let's jump on it, go for a ride, see what it's all about. Right, Honda CBR650R. Let's talk about some specs, shall we? Keep in mind, as with a couple of the bikes that I have reviewed on the channel, this bike comes in two separate trims. You get yourself a full power model and this a restricted / LAMS model, which are on today. So something to keep in mind throughout the course of this video. There'll be a couple of differences in power figures, and with that in mind, let's talk about the engine. 649 cc's liquid cooled inline 4-cylinder engine, puts out about 47 odd horsepower and about, I believe, 49 newton meters of torque at around 3500 rpm. Now that torque figure, just take that with a grain of salt, because for whatever reason, when I was researching the specs on this bike, all the official literature and articles that have been done on this bike don't really mention a whole lot about the torque figure for the LAMS version of this model. For some reason they keep mentioning the 64 newton meters of torque number even when they're talking about the LAMS model. So something to keep in mind. I did find an article that where they dynoed the bike and found it to put out about 49 newton meters of torque. So just take that with a grain of salt, and of course all of that is coupled up to a 6-speed transmission. And all I gotta say, really, the power, the delivery from this bike is very linear, very smooth, and it really makes it such an approachable bike for anyone who's never really ridden a sports bike like myself. And it definitely isn't as an intimidating or daunting experience as if you were to jump on something a little bit more, you know, extreme, such as a super sport bike of sorts. If you were to look at Honda's own stables, for example, their 600RR, that is of course more extreme compared to this. So if you've never ridden a sports bike, jumping on this, you should find it a very approachable experience, and should be as intimidating and daunting as with something a little bit more extreme. And of course that transmission, very smooth, very crisp. Every single gear shift is extremely positive. I have no issues with that. However, I will note it has a little bit of a quirk. I don't mean that in a bad thing, or in a bad way rather. It's just a little bit of a different way that you have to get used to, at least from my experience of shifting, compared to how I'm normally accustomed to shifting. So to give you an example, normally when I'm taking off from a stop, the throttle to clutch ratio, as I like to call it, if that makes sense, is about 50-50. So I'm letting out the clutch about 50%, at the same time giving about 50% throttle. However, comparatively with this bike, it tends to rely on a bit more clutch than throttle, where I find myself having to release it at about 80 to 90% of the clutch lever before the clutch engages, and then you input the throttle like that. If I do it the way I normally shift, I end up, you know, revving out the engine super loud, and it's just ridiculous. So something to just keep in mind. I quite often find myself just using two fingers to, you know, hold the clutch in, and even for shifting as well. But as I said, it is just a quirk, not in a bad way. It's just something to just keep in mind. You might have to get used to if you are accustomed to shifting a different way like I am. Oh geez, what's happening here? But aside from that, yeah, really good transmission, and finding neutral is relatively easy. It's not like you're not hunting around for it as if you're, you know, trying to take a girl's bra off for the very first time of your life. Why did I say that? I don't know why I said that. I hope my mom's not watching this video. Editor, cut that out. I'm guessing he didn't cut that out. But anyways, let's move on to the suspension. As you know, as I mentioned, this approachable nature of this bike really does carry over to the way this bike handles. So up front you have 41mm separate function forks courtesy of Showa, along with a 120/70 tire. And out back you have a monoshock with preload adjustment with a 180/55 tire. Both 17-inch rims. Now I won't really go into much detail as to what the separate function forks means, or SFF. I'll link something down below which will probably describe it a little bit better than I can, but essentially just a quick explanation is one side of the forks has the damper, the other side has the spring. And honestly, I gotta say, this bike really does handle quite well. I will say, first impressions, when I was riding on the highway, it is so incredibly stable at highway speeds, albeit it did feel a little bit lazy to make some lane changes here and there, but overall I think at everyday speeds it is pretty nimble and agile. And keeping in mind this thing weighs about 208 kilos, so it is markedly more heavy than say an MT-07. Of course that is a standard naked style of bike, but even compared to one of its main competitors, the Ninja 650, that comes at about 192 kilos if I'm not mistaken, which makes this bike still heavier than that. Yet it is able to throw its weight around without any sort of issue. It's able to fall into corners without any sort of hesitation per se, and really it does make it quite a fun bike to ride. And of course, despite that weight, it does fairly well in the brakes department. Up front you got dual Nissan 4-piston calipers that clamp onto dual 310mm discs, and out back you got yourself a single Nissan single piston caliper that clamps onto a single 240mm disc. And honestly I gotta say, it's really, the brakes are really good. You know, normally I tend to comment on how rear brakes on bikes can be a little bit mushy, but in general I gotta say this bike feels really solid in terms of the brakes. Even that rear brake, it feels very responsive, and the brake force is extremely linear, so you're not going to be grabbing the brakes, especially the front brakes as well. Design wise, I think it looks really good. You know, very sharp lines, and that front beak, it almost looks like an owl. And love this red color. It is so bright, so vibrant, and of course there's various other colors. I think the black also looks really good. I think the only thing that detracts from the looks of this bike is that protrusion out the back, which of course unfortunately that is just what you know, motorcycle manufacturers have to contend with because of regulations. But I think with a fender delete kit it will definitely clean up the lines a lot better. And overall, very good looking bike in my opinion. So whether you're commuting, cutting through some traffic, or carving up some twisty roads on a weekend blast, this bike will certainly provide a enjoyable riding experience. And the ride itself is fairly pleasant with a touch of firmness. This is a sports bike after all, as we've mentioned throughout this video, and if there was anything that I could complain about as being uncomfortable, it would be the seat. But we'll get to that shortly. So first, seat height, 810mm. I'm about 172 centimeters in height, whatever that is in feet and inches. Pretty average height basically. And I have no problems whatsoever flat footing this thing. So yeah, you know, if you're about the same height as me, even a little bit shorter, you should be fine. There shouldn't be any sort of tippy toe action going on. And in terms of riding position, it's definitely leaned over a fair bit, not to the extreme as you would find on a super sport bike such as a 600RR, but it's certainly leaned over compared to your standard naked style of bike such as an MT-07 for example. Even more leaned over than, you know, some of Triumph's naked style of bikes like a 660 or the Trident, which have a little bit of a lean. If you've never ridden a sports bike, it's something to just keep in mind if you're looking to get one of these bikes. And again, I think that's what adds to this, the approachability of this bike. It's not too extreme in terms of the super sport sense. So something to keep in mind in terms of rider ergonomics, much like the seat, as I alluded to earlier. So I rode this for about an hour, which by the way, I picked this up from Time on Bikes. I'll link them down below. Family-run business, lovely folks, do go check them out. And yeah, after about 30 to 40 odd minutes, I definitely started to feel a fair bit sore. So unless you've got the dump truck of this guy, expect to you know, feel sore in the old derriere region after about half an hour or so. So if you're looking to commute, you know, substantially long distances, anything north of 40 minutes, probably best to invest in some sort of comfort seat. In fact, I do mention that quite a lot with the other bikes I've reviewed, but I would especially say for this bike, if you are going to be traveling on average more than 30-40 odd minutes, definitely look at getting a comfort seat or some sort of custom comfort liner. It'll do your butt a whole lot of difference compared to the stock seat. So something to keep in mind. And with that, let's move further up and talk about the instrument cluster. So we've got ourselves a rectangular modern looking digital display, and you got access to all the usual information: speed, tachometer, odometer, and what should be, you know, standard of basically all bikes in my opinion, a gear indicator and a fuel gauge. Love to have a fuel gauge on a bike. It is extremely helpful, which provides a nice segue for us to talk about fuel range. So we got ourselves a 15.4 liter fuel tank, and Honda claims an average of about 5.2 liters per 100 kilometers when it comes to fuel consumption, which is a little bit more than, you know, an MT-07 for example, but the MT-07 does have 1 liter less in its fuel capacity, so I think it's proportional there, and you can expect with this bike to get around 280 to about 300 kilometers, you know, with the average riding. And I myself am a bit of an average rider, but I hope these videos are at least a touch above average, at least a little bit, because that is where we're going to wrap it up, ladies and gentlemen. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Leave a like and do consider subscribing if you're not subscribing, but more than anything, leave your comments down below. Let me know your thoughts on this bike. What do you guys think? Do you agree with what I've said? Do you disagree with what I've said? I very much love to hear your thoughts, and if you own this bike, definitely leave a comment down below. Let us know your owner experience. Wow, I've ended up somewhere really nice. Look at that, it's the sea. And yeah, thank you to all of you who've liked, subscribed, left comments on all my videos so far. I really do appreciate the support and the conversations we've been having online. So as always, take care of yourselves, ride safe, and I will catch you guys in the next video.